Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to today's video. This is just going to be a quick video of how to set up a line trace in an FPS template in Unreal 5. I'm just going to create the template now. So fresh template, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to modify the existing BP rifle, or basically the rifle that you're given, which has just appeared now here. Essentially this is already set up to fire a projectile. We're just going to slightly modify that to fire a line trace, but what we'll do is we'll keep the existing code or blueprint for the projectile, so at any point that you want to change it back you can do very quickly and simply. So with that said, let's just jump straight in and get on with it. Okay, so your fresh project is just loaded in. So what the first thing I want you to do is in the world here you'll see that you've got a rifle that already exists. If we just select this, now in the outliner on your right hand side, yours might look a little bit different. You may need to scroll down. You should see BP underscore rifle, and on the right hand side you should see edit BP underscore rifle. If you click this, it'll take you straight to the blueprint. Now inside this blueprint there's only a little bit of code or blueprint that's already been created. The first bit's pretty simple. Essentially this weapon has got a collision box around it, a sphere collision. And when you overlap this box, it casts to your character and essentially equips the weapon into your hands. You may have already done this and bumped into it and the gun attaches to your hands. Once that happens, what it does is it also binds an event to your character that says when you click, we get this on fire projectile. Now that click is actually within the character's blueprint itself. This just binds the two actions together, for example. Essentially, once you click and you get this on fire projectile, this then goes down to a spawn actor, and the actor that it's going to spawn in is the projectile mesh itself, which is the yellow ball. And it does this by getting a few bits of information to tell it where to spawn, which is typically the end of the weapon. And then it plays a sound and it tells your character to animate a sort of recoil action. So we don't really need the spawn projectile, but we may use the sound and the animation. But first and foremost, what we should do is just disconnect this on fire projectile, which you can do by holding the Alt key and clicking on this white line. With that disconnected, what we can do is we can drag over here into this bit of free space and we will type in line trace. Now there are a couple of line trace options, but typically for this kind of scenario you're going to want to pick line trace by channel. So we'll pick that, and then you're given with this node, and you're asked for a start position, an end position, and then a few other options which we'll get into. Now for the start position, typically with an FPS project, you've got a camera with a set of arms or an actor attached to it with a weapon. So essentially the camera itself is the eyes of the character. So what we want to do is we want to get a reference to this camera so we can get its location, and we'll start the line trace from the camera because that's essentially from your eye point forward. And this is typically the most accurate way to do it in an FPS situation. You can do it from the end of the barrel forward, but typically that gets a bit messier. I have a video on making a crosshair system where it effectively takes both line trace systems, merges them together so you get the best scenario for most scenarios. I'll put a card up in the top right hand corner if you want to watch that. Anyway, to get a reference to your camera in this situation, we're going to say get camera manager. And you can see here under game it says get player camera manager. Now because we're not in the actual player and we're in the rifle, it's kind of like an external reference. However, this get player camera manager can be accessed from any blueprint, so it's quite a neat little one to remember. So from the manager, what we can then say is get the actor location, and that actor is going to be the camera, which will plug then straight into our start location. Now, one other thing that we can do as well, we kind of need to know which direction the camera is facing, so we can tell it for the end position, for example, start here and end in the direction I'm looking, but let's add some distance to it, so there's a sense of range for how far the weapon can fire. So this will, to get that information, you need to do get forward vector and pick the top one and not the transform component. And essentially this is just a vector basically giving you a direction of which way you're pointing. So what we need to do to this is we need to sort of extend this and say this is the direction that we are facing, but I want to be this far in front of that direction. So to do that, we're going to get the return value and we're going to multiply it. Now this multiplying UE5 naturally defaults to a vector. We need to right click on this pin and convert it to a float. Now this float, I would recommend that you promote it. So drag off it and select promote to variable, and you can call this weapon range. And then to give this a value, you need to compile first, hit compile, and then on the right hand side you'll see weapon range now is a value of 0. I'm going to put, just for an example, 1500. This is quite a short range value, to be honest, but you can extend it afterwards if you want to. If you want to make this value visible from the outside of this blueprint, and by that I mean if you want to just select the object and be able to change it here of how far this weapon is going to shoot, you can also select expose on spawn and instance editable, and then hit compile, and you'll see now that weapon range is here underneath the details. That's quite a neat little tip for you. So with your weapon range now being set to 1500, what we can do is we actually need to add the start position and sort of the end position together in a sense. So I'm just going to do an add, and essentially what this does is it says I'm going to start from here, and then I want you to go in this direction this far forward, and that will become the end. So you're kind of merging the vectors together to say go here. So we'll pin them together, we'll plug that in, and that's essentially the line trace complete. However, we're just going to go over a couple more things just so you got a bit more understanding of how it works. Firstly, you're not going to see anything happen in the world until you select draw debug type. Now this is purely just for development, so you can see that your line trace is actually working correctly, but I would select for duration, and if you click on this little arrow you can set the draw time here. 5 seconds is quite long for testing. You get lines all over the place. I typically prefer to have it something like 2 seconds or 1 second if you just want to get a quick verification of what's happening. And then you've got trace color and hit color, so it will be red until it hits something, and then the remainder of the trace will be green. And then we've got the trace channel, but I'll explain that in just a minute. So we'll hit compile, and then we're just going to make sure that this works. So let's pick up our weapon, and if we fire now, we're getting this line trace in the world. And just for an example, if I shoot here, you see that the remainder of the trace is then in green. That gives you a good indication of your distance, and I did mention that that was quite a short range number. You can extend this depending on the weapons that you've got. Now, for example, if we have the channel set to visibility, you've got visibility and camera. It's really scenario based why you'd ever change this to camera. If you're setting up a system that really doesn't want to interfere with any sort of mesh in the world, because visibility is typically anything that you can physically see. It typically has a block visible channel. Camera is an exception to the rule. So we'll compile that. I've actually changed that to camera, and if I'm right, this trace now. Oh well, obviously the trace seems to be hitting itself, so that's probably not a good example of that. But if you set it to visibility, it doesn't. It's probably easier for me to explain this from the side of an asset. If I just select an asset here and go down to collision, and if we look at collision preset and set this to custom, and then we drop this menu down, let me just make this bigger. So you can see here that you've got trace responses, you've got visibility and camera. So this object would block both camera traces and visibility traces, but in some scenarios you can set it to ignore visibility traces. So if we now compile, pick up our weapon and try and shoot this block, our line trace actually goes all the way through it and suggests that it hasn't hit anything. So that's just how the channels work, and that's just that. So let's just go back to the line trace for a second. Now what you can do is if you want to report on the certain things that you've hit, we have this out value or this out hit result, and you can drag this out and you can break this. So what that gives you then is that gives you tons of results. What time did we hit something? What distance did we hit it at? What is the actual location where the hit happened? This is good if you want to add like decals. So like bullet holes, you can say spawn a bullet hole at this location. And if you're interested in that, I have a video which I'll also put a card up above. What actor did we hit? This is good if you was like, if this actor is an enemy, kill them type thing. And this is really neat. So with that information, you can do loads of stuff. But one thing you can do is you can say hit actor, display name, and then what we can do is we can print this to a string. So let's drag off our line trace and print string, and we're going to say let's print what we've hit to the console. I'm just going to minimize this and drag it over, because what I also want to do is I want to take advantage of this sound being played and this animation. So what I'd recommend you do is probably just drag this stuff all the way over here maybe, just to make it not look as strange. Plug this into here, and then now when we pick up the weapon and fire, we get the same extremely loud shot, we get the animation, and you can see in the top left hand corner it tells you what objects that you're actually shooting. Now all you really need is a line trace, and you may need to slightly adjust the way that the weapon is situated in the world. Typically this was set up to fire a projectile which is kind of angled slightly different. So once you put the crosshair in the world, your gun might look slightly misaligned. You just need to rotate your camera, your actor's arms and weapon slightly for it to look a bit more natural. And for a crosshair, I have a video on that as well. Essentially, you can just add a basic user interface and just put a white square in the middle, and that can be a really basic crosshair for you. This video was intended to be really short and quick, but it's ended up at like 10-15 minutes maybe already. So that's it from me. If this was helpful, please consider giving me a like and a thumbs up. They're the same thing. If you want to see more things like this, please consider subscribing. I try and post every week. And leave a comment if you want to tell me how it was, or if there's anything else that you want to know about, leave a comment down below and I'll try and make a video for it. And keeping it sweet and short, thank you, and I'll see you in another video.